The indifference curve theory is a theory of consumer behavior. It tries to explain to us the shape of our demand curve. That is why the demand curve for the individual consumer is downward sloping from left to right. Before explaining the theory of indifference curve, we go through the assumptions. The individual consumer is assumed to be rational, that is, he aims at maximizing satisfaction. The utility is an ordinal measurement. What we mean by ordinal measurement, we compare it to marginal utility theory. Marginal utility theory says that utility is a cardinal measurement, that is, we can give value to utility. In this theory of indifference curve, we do not have to give value. We just have to say whether the consumer is going to have a higher level of satisfaction or a lower level of satisfaction. Then we assume that there is diminishing marginal rate of substitution, which means that the consumer is willing to give up less and less of one good in order to get an extra unit of the other good. There's also the consistency principle, which we are going to come through again when we are going to go through the diagrams. The consumer can also rank his preferences. That is, he will be able to see whether he is able to get a high level of satisfaction or a lower level of satisfaction. Let us analyze the indifference curve itself. What the curve shows to us. So the curve is going to show to us the different combination of two goods that yield the same level of satisfaction to the consumer. Here from the diagram, we can see that on the curve, we have point A, B, and C. So the consumer is indifferent between combination A, B, and C, because combination A, B, and C will give the same level of satisfaction to the consumer. Now, the shape of the IC. IC is drawn convex to the origin, as we mentioned in the assumption. IC is convex to the origin because of diminishing marginal rate of substitution. Here the consumer is moving from point A to point B. The consumer gives up 5 units of commodity Y in order to get 2 extra units of commodity X. Then the consumer may move from point B to C, which means that the consumer is giving again 5 units of good Y, but to get 3 extra units of good X. So in other words, the consumer is giving less and less of one good in order to get more and more of the other good. Now, why indifference curve cannot intersect each other? It is because of the consistency principle. The consumer has to be consistent in his choice. So from this diagram, we can see clearly that the point A and B, combination A and B, give the consumer the same level of satisfaction. That is, the consumer is indifferent between A and B. Similarly, A and C lies on the same IC, which means that the consumer is indifferent between A and C. Now, if the consumer is indifferent between A and B and is indifferent between A and C, the consumer cannot be different between B and C. And from the diagram, we can see clearly that the consumer is different between B and C. The consumer gets a high level of satisfaction with combination C and a lower level of satisfaction with combination B. So indifference curve cannot intersect each other. The consumer has to be consistent in his choice. Now the indifference map is going to show us the entire view of the consumer choice. The consumer can rank his preferences. The consumer is on IC1. The consumer is having a lower level of satisfaction. As he moves on higher IC, he will get a higher level of satisfaction. IC1 gives lower level of satisfaction and IC2 gives higher level of satisfaction. This is clearly from the diagram because the consumer is getting on IC2, the consumer is getting more good Y and of good X than on IC1. So definitely the consumer is having a higher level of satisfaction. Similarly, IC3, the consumer will get more of good Y and of good X compared to IC2. Therefore, the consumer has a higher level of satisfaction. Now, where the consumer will be in equilibrium? Consumer with a given budget. Consumer is constrained by his budget. So the consumer will have to maximize satisfaction with a given level of income. So we can draw the budget line of the consumer. If the consumer have a given level of income and we know the prices of the two goods, we can determine the different combination which the consumer can have with his budget. The consumer will be in equilibrium when the budget line is tangent to the highest IC. Now, from the diagram, we can see that the consumer can afford combination R, S, Q, T, and H. Now, which one is going to give the consumer the high level of satisfaction? It is definitely combination Q, because combination Q lies on the highest IC, compared to combination S and T, which is still available to the consumer with his budget, but it lies on a lower IC. So we can conclude that the consumer will be in equilibrium when the budget line is tangent to the highest indifference curve. And from this, we can also deduce that the marginal rate of substitution will be equal to the price ratio when the consumer is in equilibrium. That is, the marginal rate of substitution is equal to the price ratio of good Y and X. Why? Because the slope of the budget line is the price ratio, and the slope of the indifference curve is the marginal rate of substitution. To summarize, we can say that the indifference curve is drawn convex to the origin. The consumer will be in equilibrium where the indifference curve is tangent to the budget line, and the consumer will always aim at reaching the highest indifference curve, since higher indifference curve give higher level of satisfaction. But the consumer is constrained by his income. Now, let us see one question. So if we say that the further the indifference curve from the origin, so the further the indifference curve from the origin, the higher will be the level of satisfaction. Indifference curve which move further from the origin, it gives higher level of satisfaction. Indifference curve is also drawn convex to the origin. This I have mentioned in the explanation. So indifference curve is always drawn convex to the origin. Thanks for listening.